Oh god, this zombie's gonna wake up, isn't he? Yeah. Oh, huh? Wait. I thought this guy totally eats you when he's. Of all the franchises that have existed longer than the children that some of you own, whether you intended them or not, the Resident Evil series, or Biohazard for the Nippon Bros, has been through a lot over many, many years, seeing it start on the first PlayStation and pretty much existing over every subsequent generation that came after. Survival horror has always been the associated moniker that you can always count on the franchise being, for the most part. It's seen many highs, it's seen a few lows, some PR moves that scare me more than the actual game. Hell, it's even had a few movie/TV adaptations that I'll probably get to watching when I'm not quite sober. But it's hard to imagine the entirety of the horror game genre without Resident Evil. And the first one that started it all, which is old enough to have its own 401k, is Resident Evil 1. Released back on the PlayStation 1, Resident Evil established pretty much what the series has always been known for: surviving creepy monsters that don't go down so easily, cutting-edge graphics that push the boundaries of generational hardware, an eerie atmosphere that ensured you'd have difficulty sleeping at night, and voice acting that ensured you'd have difficulty sleeping at night.
Stop it! Don't open that door!
While not being quite the first to create these conventions, something that Alone in the Dark is often attributed as, Resident Evil refined it in a way that made it such a unique game that stuck for a lot of players. Shooting zombies and surviving till the end made for a very horrifyingly fun experience. And while many generations of RE games have evolved over the years, changing perspectives, and even remaking old ones to feel terrifyingly fresh, a lot of their DNA, and what makes them great, can be traced back to its original foundation, one that even saved the franchise when it nearly forgot what it was. I've had the chance to play the first, primarily thanks to two versions of the game existing. One being the remake, which you could make a pretty compelling argument that it is the best version of RE1, and the other that I remember the most, because I love my Nintendo DS, was Deadly Silence. And for being the most weirdly remastered version of the original, I friggin' enjoyed it. So, with that said, because of my fondness for old-ass games, Resident Evil being one of my favorite long-running franchises ever, and just happy to exist in the timeline where I get to play so many of them, what's it like to experience the OG after 30 years?
What? What is this?
The story of Resident Evil 1 is a tale that somehow manages to contain a mix of both mystery that lets players find out just what the heck is going on within the Spencer Mansion, alongside some very ultra cheesy B-movie acting.
Chris! Don't die!
Taking place in ye olde yesteryear of 1998, the birth year for you 28-year-olds, the Raccoon City Police Department's elite task force, known as STARS, which I've never really bothered to remember what the acronym stood for until now, are on a mission to investigate some grisly murders that have been occurring in the nearby Arklay Mountains. When contact with the first team was lost, Alpha Team, as introduced by the game's lovely 90s cinematic,
Chris Redfield,
is sent in to investigate the surrounding area, only to be greeted by some very vicious bows.
Joseph!
With no chopper to rescue them because apparently Brad was too much of a coward,
No! Don't go!
Alpha Team decides to take refuge in a nearby mansion.
Wow! What a mansion!
With the STARS members being separated, it's up to Chris or Jill to investigate the mansion and discover its deep dark secrets. A mysterious story that, while I'm already used to hearing for the upteenth time, is a pretty fun mystery for something back in the mid-90s. Of course, I will address the biggest B-movie acting elephant in the room in just a bit, but focusing on the mystery alone, I actually love how Resident Evil peppers its world-building plot points as you're running through the game. When it's not the cutscenes, it's all of the files you find that shed light on the mansion's inner workings. The diaries, letters, and reports in the different rooms all of which anecdote the actions of the scientists and their unfortunate outcomes, really solidifies RE's sense of horror mystery. This is also something that modern RE has managed to continue doing as well. I always appreciated the notion of piecing together just what the heck is going on as the game progresses. Their great world building and the file reports have always been one of my favorite components that fill the bigger background picture for the majority of the RE games, and the first still managed to showcase its original essence even if it's not the most in-depth compared to what they are now. Though I do think some texts in this game are way more iconic than any other. Now, the characters have always played an integral role in making the franchise memorable. Fun personalities like Leon the Quipmaster in RE4 and 9, Ethan as the everyday man thrust into the RE universe, Chris as the boulder puncher. There's been no shortage of fun personalities throughout the years. Resident Evil 1 is memorable in the cheesiest way possible. And as far as my experience with most of the RE games,
Have it your way then!
I believe the first is the cheesiest one of all.
That was too close. You were almost a Jill sandwich.
You're right.
Every character's vocal expression is extremely exaggerated and tonally off that it feels like you're watching the plot of an old B-movie action film or the plot of what could be a low-budget porno.
I'm Chris Redfield from the Alpha team. Are you the only person here from the Bravo team?
Well, because the helicopter made a forced landing, I just ran into this house anyway, but
I can see it being detracting from the game's horror mood because of how silly and tonally off the characters are, but I've just come to love it. I kind of like them from the perspective that they add a nice contrast to the game so it's not overly monotone, and they make for some nice breaks from the stress of running through the mansion.
Not the bears!
Though I'm pretty sure that's not what's intended by the voice actors, and usually something like this is a result of disparity between the actual acting and directing. But then again, this was the mid-90s when voiceovers weren't as well developed in games as they are now. That said, as far as the main narrative point, wherein the characters actually progress the story, it's pretty straightforward. Rescue squad investigates disturbance, main characters find and try to stop said disturbance.
Bye! Have a beautiful time!
And depending on your choices, you can either find the ending where everyone comes out safe and the mansion is destroyed, or a few bad ones where some people don't make it. No, Barry, this isn't even canon.
My God!
A story that is pretty much the origin point, including RE0 as well, for the entirety of the RE franchise. Nothing too complex or narratively stimulating, but a good complement to the overall game. And I love that the world-building aspect still managed to capture its horror story vibe, along with some very goofy acting that I actually think has gotten better with age.
It's Forrest. Oh my God.
I do think the remake version is a lot more dramatic and believable when it comes to unraveling its main plot through the characters, especially by comparison to the original.
Hey, Whisker, where's Chris?
Jill, no. You don't want to go back out there.
But on the one hand, the remake lacks a Jill sandwich.
A second late, you would have fit nicely into a sandwich.
Really?
It might be handy if you, the master of unlocking, take it with you.
Survival horror is the name of the gameplay here. In fact, they remind you every time you load up a save. As the most traditional Resident Evil, surviving the Spencer Mansion is all about how well you're able to manage your resources, inventory space, solving puzzles, and tank controls.
No!
Pretty much the standard since the beginning, Jill and Chris have a limited number of item space that they can use, as well as the iconic storage space that you can use to place items. You have your standard knife and pistol, though Chris needs to find his later. But both characters can also use weapons that they eventually find to make zombie destruction a lot faster. You'll also use the classic green, red, and blue herbs to heal damage and poison, plus the famous typewriter in which you'll need ink ribbons to save the game. Other important factors include enemies that do not go down so easily, thus emphasizing the resource management in order to survive the encounters. Or speedrunning, because that's the most efficient method. Zoom! As far as just these systems are concerned, they actually hold up pretty well when it comes to the basis of survival horror. They have always been the stress factors that make the genre what it is on a gameplay level. And despite RE1 being the first in the franchise to do it, it still manages to feel stressful. Having to think about what equipment I need to bring, but also leaving some space for items and keys to pick up, is the grounded experience that stops you from being the typical overpowered protagonist, and instead makes you a vulnerable one. A gameplay loop that I've always enjoyed for a lot of the RE games as the main experience, and it was still fun to do in RE1. So, it's still great to play, right? No, not the tanks! No! Tank controls are a pretty outdated control scheme that only exists for the hardcore retro enthusiasts and people like me who huff copium. If there's one thing that I can appreciate this type of control scheme for, it's the way levels are set up in RE1. Rather than modern 3D third-person games, where the movement is relative to the camera, and the characters will always move in the direction you input, the movement of tank controls is relative to the player model instead, meaning that regardless of the camera position, which is always fixed, forward will always be forward no matter where you're facing. Additionally, instead of being able to move diagonally in the intercardinal directions as you would for modern movement, you instead turn left or right, literally like how a vehicle moves, hence the moniker for tank controls. Now, this is kind of a big deal for classic Resident Evil for two main reasons. One, it's meant to make the game appear more cinematic. As you can see, Resident Evil has fixed camera placements in very different locations. Because of the various camera transitions in a level, tank controls alleviates the issues of moving from scene to scene, so holding forward will always keep you moving forward no matter what camera angle, whereas modern controls would force you to change input direction based on the camera shift. You can actually see this in the RE1 remake if you enable modern controls. It's not that bad if you don't mind always quickly adjusting the direction. It's also great for juking.
Nope.
The second is that, whether intentional or not by design, it does make the game feel significantly clunkier and not as actiony, thereby making you less of a movie action hero who can easily take down the monsters and instead a vulnerable protagonist that is trying to survive. I'm okay with tank controls, but I also don't really miss it. I do think it looks cinematic, and it kind of brings a different horror vibe from, say, something like the first-person POV of RE7, 8, and 9. That said, do I want these as a main control scheme again for the franchise? I can play ball, but I'm not that desperate for it. Although, considering that Capcom has let players shift between first and third-person perspectives in Resident Evil 9, I think it would actually be interesting if they decided to put a third option in which they brought back tank controls. Maybe not for something like Leon, who requires a lot of precision aiming and movement, but I could see it working for Grace on account of her survival horror gameplay. But when it comes to RE1, I was completely fine with using them, combined with the resource management and shooting. Also, I did not know shotguns had guaranteed headshots. And overall, I'm quite satisfied that the gameplay still managed to scratch that survival horror itch. In fact, although the perspectives are different for the modern games, plus the remakes after one, the essence of survival horror is pretty much replicated very well from the original. I really enjoyed that even when it looks like good aim could help you survive the modern titles, tough enemies and limited resource are still the defining factors in creating the survival horror. Not every RE game, mind you, and some have different focus in their design, but the ones that managed to replicate and elevate the original concept from the first did it very well. The only other main nitpicks were how unforgiving enemies can be, since they can sometimes stunlock you to death because you don't get any recovery animations or invincibility frames. And the game just having some old as heck quality of life systems. Let's just say I'm grateful for the fact that modern RE lets you move, swap, discard, and even combine items on the fly. I've always been okay with using ink ribbons to save the game because I just got used to it, but I can still also see this as being a huge turnoff for most players. Same with item management. I think Resident Evil doesn't exactly guide you on how to properly manage inventory other than trial by fire. So it's very easy to get caught up in collecting too many resources and constantly backtracking to make space. I do think Chris having only 6 inventory slots is a bit punishing. But then again, I believe he is meant to be the harder difficulty character, whereas Jill is best as the easier introductory character. I do actually like Chris as the second playthrough because it feels like an appropriate upscale challenge to try and finish the game with a slight difference in story and a few puzzles. Plus, also utilizing your knowledge to finish it as fast as possible. But that just might be me wanting to speedrun.
Oh shit, 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 oh shit!
In general, I still really enjoyed trying to survive my way through Resident Evil 1. It might be a hard sell to someone who has never played classic RE, or just classic tank control games in general, and I'd say the remake would be the more recommended avenue to go.
What is it?
Hailing from the PlayStation 1 era, for its time, Resident Evil was considered to be one of the best graphically looking games, especially when the 3D polygonal market started to dominate home consoles. Its detailed and maneuverable models, pre-rendered backgrounds, alongside its cinematic camera angles, made for a very atmospheric and visually impressive game. Nowadays, it looks something like a well-baked potato. That said, I do think its approach to making the game look visually detailed is impressive for its time. The camera angles add an extremely cinematic quality to it compared to the conventional third-person camera view. It basically sets up levels to look more scenic, emphasizing its use of space to create scale. Certain rooms can look more grand, some hallways more claustrophobic, and some corridors are way more tense than they need to be since you can't see the enemies coming. Granted, modern technology and perspective changes like first person have allowed other RE games to maintain, if not improve, this type of visual atmosphere. But I can still appreciate the older methodology. Same for the character models. Dated and looking like mannequin figures, yes, but impressive looking when you consider the time period in which the game was in. Since I recently finished Super Mario RPG, where that game is still performing on a 2D plane, going to 3D was a huge jump. Even more so when you consider that both games came out the same year. Models were detailed enough that you can easily tell that the clothes look appropriately layered for their 3D design, as well as the animations being more than appropriate for a specific model frame. Zombies shamble with their arms out, hunters are tiny short kings who are extremely aggressive. Even Chris and Jill get to have idle animations. Huh. Now I want a Jill sandwich. As for the art style, very realistic and normal looking to portray the grounded sense of reality with the obvious bit of zombie flair to make it a horror title. Very close to their inspired themes from zombie films of George A. Romero, and I think a little bit of The Shining. Very well done though, with how they tried to achieve it visually. But sound is still one of the best components in making Resident Evil 1 a horror game. Voiceovers are debatable, but I'm sure they can be horrifying for some.
Don't come this way! No!
The effects are really good at emphasizing certain sounds when needed. Things like footsteps, zombie groans, or the famous doors opening bring a very creepy and tense atmosphere that feels very natural to the game. And the music is still the best. Eerie when it needs to be, quiet to add way more tension, and sometimes safe to help anxious people calm down, or when you need some relaxing music to sleep to. It's great, and I love that the original RE soundtrack is still able to bring and even maintain its original horror tone even today. And lastly, the voice acting, well, you either love it or hate it, and I happen to love it.
What is it?
Old as heck graphics, But I can't help but appreciate the technicalities that went into making Resident Evil 1 look and sound terrifying for its time. I think if the visual presentation is too old for you, then the remake does the better job at the moment with trying to modernize the original and make it look more presentable. Plus, I still got to feel that exact same tension, atmosphere, and mood with a little more, considering the additions and changes. Still, the original was a fun old spectacle that I was happy to see.
But just take a look at this!
So, is it still worth playing? Part of me says yes, because if you can somehow get a hold of playing the original, and you don't mind the retro trip down the old rabbit hole, I'd say it's still fun. And if you've played a lot of modern Resident Evil games, it's great to see where it all came from, and how much that original design has been replicated throughout the series. Having come from Resident Evil 9 before this, there's a lot of things I love about that game that can be attributed to RE1. But logistically, it's so much easier to argue that the remake is the best version for a lot of people to play. There's some major differences, yes, especially with things like characters and bosses, defensive mechanics, as well as the voice acting, for good or bad.
What the hell is this thing?
But the overall experience itself is very faithful to the original and improves on a lot of other concepts as well. It's also available on every major platform, so acquiring it is quite easy, whereas the original, I think, is only available on GOG and the PlayStation Store. At its core, the first Resident Evil game is the series' most primordial experience, but it's still astounding to see how much that original DNA has helped maintain and even evolve the RE franchise today. Perspectives may shift, and the action may be more visceral, but survival horror has always been the constant influence that makes these games great, and I'm happy to see just how influential and important the first game still is. But that's gonna do it for today, guys. Thanks for sticking around. There will be more games to play and more videos coming soon, so please stay tuned if you'd like to see more. But for now, I'll see you all next time.